And we're calling a quick audible. So I just want to do mic check. Can everyone hear me well on the virtual and in person? So thumbs up. Thank you. So we're going to start with intros first. So a little bit about me really quickly. So my name is Sean McPherson. My background's in scaling B2B customer success organizations from seed to acquisition stage. So I've had the pleasure of working for many Boston startups from QuickBase, Drift, Alice, Smarter Sorting, and more recently I'm at a company called Fleetio where I'm the director of customer success, where we work with fleet management companies to help them from fleets of all sizes operate more efficiently. So I'm excited to kind of share my experiences and my learnings with you all today. And I'm actually going to pass it over to Stacy next. So we're going to go virtual for a second.
Awesome. So I'm Stacy Justino, currently the customer support manager at Loom. Before that, I was director of support at Wistia. So I've been part of the Boston area startup scene for a bit. Actually moved out here for that job and have, cemented some roots here. So I am really excited to be back on a panel for Startup Boston Week. I participated a few years ago. And so it's a week that I think is really important for the community, and I'm always happy to be able to engage with it.
Thank you, Stacy.
And I can hop in and same likewise. Am I audible? Everybody can hear? Perfect. So I'm Manali Shinde, CEO and founder of Grad Insta. I'm an electronics engineer turned artist. So I've spent a decade-long career with companies like Texas Instruments and Future Electronics, mostly in customer-facing roles like technical sales engineer to handling territories. Have been very fortunate to handle startups all across the globe. So was stationed in Switzerland, Germany, India, Shanghai, and United States. 2 years back, I kind of took a segue and started my startup, Grad Insta, which is a short form for instant gratification. We sell unique nature-inspired jewelry. So I'm using my knowledge and leveraging the 3D printing, supply chain, customer service, and sales experience into my startup right now. So yeah, excited to be here and share whatever I can I've learned in past 10 years.
Perfect. Thank you both. So really quick, I'm going to be moderating and also on the panel as a heads up. So if you see me jumping in on questions, that's why. If you see me looking at a sheet, that's also why. So let's kick things off. The first question we're going to start with, what KPIs are most important for measuring success within a customer support team? And since Stacy, you have the direct title of customer support manager, we're going to kick it off with you.
Great. I think that it really does depend a bit on what your top line company sort of objectives are. But I think one of the important things, I think what we'll talk about later is customer satisfaction, right? Are your customers happy with the support being provided? Something that kind of tracks sort of either wait times or time to resolution. It kind of depends on your org. Some organizations, maybe people don't care if you get back to them super quickly. They really care that they're going to get a full, complete response that handles their issue. So maybe it's something that's time-based, but it really depends on what is important to your customer base and your organization. So it could be first response time. It could be time to resolution. It could be a percentage of first contact resolution, right? If that's really important to your users. So I think, but something that's sort of related to the time to resolve or get back to customers, depending on your business. What I try to look at for the business is, okay, what can we track that shows that we're contributing to revenue? I think that's pretty important. Could vary by business, but that's sort of a question I ask myself. What can we track that shows the impact our team has on product quality? What can we track that shows our team's impact on increasing user engagement or customer engagement or retention? And so I think that, there's some key metrics, but there's also like asking yourself these questions is what are the metrics that makes most sense for our business that show that our team is adding value and contributing to sort of top line company goals and objectives.
Perfect. Now I'm curious, kind of like in your space, how do you track like in measuring success with your teams today and just in your market?
when I was in the technical sales engineer, I had like thousands of people and team members that can depend on. Trust me, every small little metric was like we were very, very curious about. Now that I'm a startup, my lens has kind of changed. So I think predominantly I focus on if any customer is reaching out to us, whether it's email, contact, we do in-person events. So we have got Clover and Square POS systems as well, where people just will reach out like happy with the purchase, not happy with the purchase, or didn't get that 1 year ring back, something or other. I think for me, I track very, very closely of how quickly we are getting back to customer. So for me, that timeline looks like 24 hours. So no matter what, even if it is something we don't know an answer to, it is just good to let the customer know, like, we're looking into it. We hear you. We got your query, but we'll get back to you. So that is something I care about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back and kind of like that time, the first response is always super important when you're thinking about a customer experience. Kind of starting to think about as businesses going to shape and grow, how do these metrics how are they reviewed? How do they pivot over time? I'll talk a little bit from my experiences. When you're an early stage company, a lot of times you're really focused on just, do we want to be on product quality? Do you want to be on customer experience? So that's talking a little bit about where we may prioritize time to first value versus resolution out of the get-go. But as you're scaling, as you're adding more support reps, as you're adding more like omni-channel experiences to those metrics may change. And it's always good to counterbalance that with some form of satisfaction to make sure, like, yes, we're prioritizing speed, but are we also like having a good experience to go in tandem with that? And Stacy, on your side, you've been with Wistia, you've been with Loom, both two scaling B2B companies. I'm curious how those have you pivoted over time with your teams?
Yeah, I think as the company grows and company sort of directives and objectives change, kind of figuring out you have to split things out sometimes based on spend, right? ARR. That's going to probably be a future step for a support team, right? But how can you balance providing sort of a faster, more in-depth, bespoke experience for those very, key strategic accounts that you've identified, while also still making sure that you're getting back to the rest of your user base in like a reasonable amount of time, because those free users will often become paid users. So one thing that I've tried to do, because most companies generally know how many days is the period where somebody is going to likely become a paying customer. So what I've like to do, if you have the data, is prioritize those, like, people within their first 14 days are the most likely, like, that's when they're likely to purchase something. So we don't want those folks waiting the same amount of time that somebody's been a free user for 2 years, because we can really have an impact on converting that user into a paid user. So I think, yeah, as you go forward, sort of breaking out sort of CSAT, first response time to resolution, all of your core metrics by those like customer buckets, and making sure that those are the same buckets that the rest of the organization is using, right? I've been in situations where support sort of sliced that information differently than the rest of the company. And that makes it really hard to share that information in a way that is easily digestible by the rest of the company. So I've been a big proponent of like starting from as soon as you can, making sure, okay, if this is how customer success like buckets ARR, then we most certainly need to be doing it the same way in support. Because it saves a lot of headache, and it just makes the information you're providing to the organization so much more valuable.
Awesome. I'm curious in your current company, how have you pivoted, or how like have you seen pivots that have happened with your metrics over time?
So I think I can definitely talk about in terms of shipping time. So I feel when we started, all I was happy about was getting that one order, right? Just like happy, hooray. Didn't care when I'm shipping, just had an order, ship, and great. Now, given like we have grown and our e-commerce site has grown as well, we are now like focusing a parameter of like once we get an order, how much it's taking time for us to pack and get it out. We try to make sure it's kind of getting out in like the next 24 hours. Like if you get it's literally a policy. If it's an order on the weekend, we ship it on Monday. But I would say this is something that I didn't focus on before when I started, just because it wasn't like a very important entity. But now that we have grown, and I think it becomes part of like how customers are happy with us or not, it is part of like how fast are we able to ship a parameter added, which wasn't there 2 years back.
Awesome. Now, kind of like looking at, let's talk a little bit about how you build a strong understanding at your company for not necessarily the department of customer success, but just customer success, and kind of like focus on those metrics. I'll speak a little bit to some of my experience because, in just really quickly, is like I have had the fortunate experience of working with self-serve all the way up to enterprise, so very large deals to very one-to-one. And that's challenging. So, especially how do you create alignment with your product organization because they are at odds ends sometimes. And same thing with the sales organization. So, one of the things I really prioritize when trying to build that alignment is understanding what are the different parts of the customer journey and how do we measure that and how do we counterbalance that. So, an example that we've been talking about a little bit with support is similar to onboarding, where we're looking at what's that time to first value. One of the things you want to look at from a time to first value to counterbalance that is you don't want to be going too fast because that's going to overwhelm a customer. So how do you understand the satisfaction that they had with that experience? Same thing as you're looking into the middle life cycle. How are you balancing that with health? And how are you looking at different segments with your customer base? So your enterprise customers are going to have very different points of views than your self-service customers. In your self-service customers, you're really working with your product team to take more of that, like what I would call a B2C mindset. And how do you get them moving without human intervention? And I'm curious, I'm actually going to bring it back over here first.
Sure.
I'm curious how you think about that with like from an end-to-end perspective today and what you've seen work well
I think for us, as you correctly said, when you're talking about the large B2B and then companies, you took me back to my days of TI, which there's new pure product getting developed. I'm calling on Honeywell, 10 teams across the world. It's a mess around. And you want to make sure everybody's on the same page because you're trying to win that particular socket, which could be millions of units. That was a very different metric, and there are way too many moving bodies. Since I've done a startup, I've realized we are relatively small. We have just at like a 7 digits and growing up to more. What I've realized is for our customers, when they kind of ask us anything, it is coming down to like we are getting back to them, letting them know that we are working even if we don't know anything. So for me, my customer service has worked more onto form a community now. So the way we have grown our startup, so I'm a very floral person. I did a lot of floral jewelry, floral products. Now, if you go on our website, you'll see literally starfishes, animals, oh my gosh, leaves. Think about random things like recent one is snail. So the way for me, the customer support or success, or even like making sure that KPI is looking is asking my customers what next they want to see from us. And it goes a lot like through email marketing, Square, like on weekends, we are pretty much billing it out 1,000 customers on a day. At Square POS or Clover, we would ask them at the checkout, what next do you want to see? So we'll put like 2 random categories we are thinking, and third would be like others. And we would ask them to use their imagination. And that's where snail has come, tulip garden has come, piglet has come, like things one will not think for a jewelry, but these are the kind of suggestions made. So I feel like that is how I feel. It's not just like the customer support or like, hey, thank you for the purchase, but more about like, hey, I want you to be part of my company. I want you to tell me what you want to see more. So more than just a customer, now you're like, I want you to be part of the Gratinsta community. So that's how I think it has changed for me as we have grown.
I love it. And that's probably getting you recurring user or buyers as well.
Yes. So in our past, like once someone tells me like they want to see a tulip jewelry, for example, and typically every 3 months we'll review what are the top like candidates for next design. And once those candidates are out and we release the products, we already have collected the email IDs or phone numbers that we have, and we just let them know like, hey, as per your feedback, this was the Rockstar, number one comer. We have launched it. If interested, buy it. It's a pre-launch, so we kind of start collecting money early on as well. But yes, it's pretty much like trying to recoup and get the re-revenue from them.
Perfect. And Stacy, in your world, how are you helping others around you, and what have you learned work well in understanding customer success metrics?
Yeah, so I guess like a little, since it's a little twofold question. And so I think one thing, because I came from B2C to B2B. And so I was like, actually, what I was really excited about was like, okay, I got to learn about customer success and sales, two sort of teams that I never really worked with too much. But then the funny part was at Whiskey at the time, we had a very small customer success team. So a lot of the customer success sort of activities were actually just done by the support team because there was only a really small book of business that was being handled by the customer success team. But at Loom, I've gained even more knowledge, and I think for me, when I was sort of starting, I just wanted to know, what are the objectives of this team? What are the people on this team like? What are the like kind of the components of what customer success covers? Because that's the thing I learned too, is it's very different from company to company, right? Depending on what stage the company's in or what kind of product the company has. And then tying those sort of customer success metrics and like, okay, how can we pair together to make a consistent customer journey? And so that was one of my big things I like worked on is, okay, sales, success, and support. What are sort of the key responsibilities of each of those teams, and how can we make sure when we're handing off customers that it's a really smooth experience? But I had to figure out, like, learn what are the sales metrics, what are the success metrics, and how do those sort of work together with their support metrics, so that we can make sure that when we were building these flows, that we kept the customer experience in mind first, but that it still made sense for those three distinct teams. And I think we really focused on making sure each team had a really good understanding of what the other two teams were responsible for. And I think that really helped, because I think a lot of times in orgs, you don't have to learn those things. But I think it makes you a much more effective at your job, and it makes you a much better partner with your success colleagues and your sales colleagues when they know you have an understanding of their job and what they're held accountable for. And then I think the thing that turns into a superpower is that when you can work together with your success compatriots, then you can surface that like a much more holistic view of what the customer is saying to the rest of the organization. So I think it enables you to be like might have a much more impact on sort of product quality, quarterly planning, right? Because you're saying, okay, across success and support, these are the most important things that our user base has been saying, especially these in our ideal customer profile. And you can have this more like just like a stronger message that you can share with like product and engineering.
Amazing. Now I'm gonna jump us to kind of like the flip side of this. Like, what are some like learnings, mistakes we all have had when it comes to measuring customer satisfaction? I'm gonna start here because I've made a lot of mistakes here. I have a very early on in my career, I had a very biased point of view as NPS isn't really a metric for B2B, which that it is a metric. How you leverage it in your organization is super important. How you tailor it to your organization is important when you use it. So what I learned really quickly is like, if you just forget about satisfaction, you're starting to really lose that customer experience lens. So what I learned over time was how do you counterbalance NPS also with more transactional surveying as well. Not just kind of having NPS be the end all be all, but like looking at different stages of your customer journey and actually having that complemented. So that way you have that pulse of your customer with your company metrics as well. And I'm curious, Stacy, kind of what have you seen in your time with some common mistakes with whether it's NPS, CSAT, you name it?
Yeah, I think when it comes to CSAT, especially early on, I think a lot of folks like, okay, this is like our support team's North Star. But if you are an early stage startup, you don't really usually have a really very high CSAT volume. So it is really volatile. And I have been like responsible, or known folks have been responsible for keeping it above a certain number, but we got 50 CSAT surveys this week. You get 4 of those that are negative, and you will have a percentage that is very low, but it's actually not representative of the overall satisfaction of your customer base. So I think And I think that that is true for both like at a department level, but also like an individual level. Like I've definitely, set CSAT as sort of an individual metric for people, and then dug down deeper is like, oh, they get like 50 surveys a month. That's not, really representative, and it's not fair, right? So I think CSAT is definitely important, but I think if your volume is low, what I've tended to focus on there is like, okay, how can we get more people to fill out this survey so that this is statistically significant information? Because I do think it's really important. So how can we change when we send this survey? How can we change the wording of the survey? Because like I said, CSAT is very important, but also it's only sort of important when it's statistically significant. And then I think being able to dive deeper too, because I think a lot of times you can just look at the number and be like, okay, we're having a good week, or oh, this week's not so good. So I think one of the learnings I had is, okay, you need to be able to drill down and figure out, okay, what is my hypothesis, or why did we have this dip? Okay, wait times went up by like 4 hours. That makes sense that it would go down. Oh, we had 3 incidents last week. Also makes sense why our CSAT would go down, because I think the rest of the company really needs sort of that context, because it's really easy to just either lose sight of it and be like, kind of start to ignore it because, oh, it's like 90% every week, whatever, or not really understand what those fluctuations mean and think that. I think the assumption a lot of times is that it like is something the support team did wrong. So I think being able to provide that voiceover is really important. And I think I've been in more than one occasion where I probably didn't provide that voiceover as frequently or soon enough, right?
Love it. On the Manali, on kind of your side, what have you learned from it? Because I'm sure your volume's a little bit different, I would imagine.
Yes, and as a startup, a lot of failures. So, oh my gosh, time we'll run out of time. So, I think one thing that when you guys were speaking, I was thinking, how is it relevant to what we are doing right now? It's kind of customer satisfaction, but it is kind of like if you're e-commerce, you are going to be running ads, right? And there's a lot of noise around what metrics people should be looking when you're running ads, whether it is the direct buy, is it the click through, it's the traffic to your website, is it the watch time, what is it, what links they clicked. And I think when we started running the ads initially, my only metric was, did they make the purchase on the website or not? Like, I really didn't care about that whole internal cycle of what they're going through. And I think through our lot of failures, investing money, losing it, never seeing a dime back, we have learned now that I think it's eventually setting up that whole journey for them. So I think rather than just caring about whether they bought or not, the fact is they need a lot of touch points when they're listening from like a new brand. So are they visiting the website? So when I'm running the ads now we are looking, is the traffic on the website increasing? I think that's what we are focusing on, rather than just that they end up making a purchase or not. Because they'll need to see us on maybe on different channels as well. They need to see probably more customer success stories before they end up making a purchase. So for me and us, it was a learning of like, rather than focusing the ads just on direct purchase, have more of the experience that the customer will be going digitally on our website.
Perfect. Stacey, I'm actually going to pass this one first to you because I know you have good perspectives on voice of customer programs. But what are some of the best ways to share customer feedback with other departments in kind of the mindset of getting continuous improvement and feedback?
I mean, I think the number one thing that I try to always root the like voice of the customer, that customer feedback in is, it's like a core customer support tenet, right? Speak to the customer in their language. So the base level, I think, thing is speak to the other teams, to your company, to your colleagues in their language, or, like I mentioned before, sort of that shared company language you have, because that's the kind of language that's going to be most effective and actually showing that, like, okay, this does align with our company goals, with our ideal customer profile, what we're trying to achieve in the next like year or whatever, or quarter. And I think that a lot of support teams, I've been victim to this as well, think about it in their terms, because we're so like close to the customer, but we then get sort of discouraged when product engineering doesn't like, hey, we're telling you what's really important to these customers. It's going to make a big difference. It's going to make the product better. why are they not agreeing? And usually it's not because that's not true. It's because we haven't shared that information in the like what should be a common language. And so one thing that I've always tried to do is make sure that the sort of the tagging or dispositions you pick for tickets in a support team, that the definitions are very clear. And I've worked with product and engineering to be like, hey, is this how you view the parts of this problem? For one quick example, when I was at Wistia, we had a product, and I was like, oh, our tags are really not great. We haven't really thought about them. So I came up with a list working with some folks on my team. Then I shared that with the product and engineering folks who work on that product. And I was like, hey, does this make sense? And they were like, actually, we don't look at recording and uploading or what other part as two different parts of a process. It's like one process. If we had split that out as two tags, so that they're like, that's not important. If I hadn't asked them, then I would never have known, and we would have had two categories that were, basically one and the same for on the engineering side. So I think that was like an aha moment for me. Like, oh, all I did was, take a few minutes to ask the folks who are working on this part of the product how they view the problems in relation to that product, and we were able to just kind of combine them. Recording and sharing were actually one bucket, and I would never have known that. I would have made my team have to pick between 11 categories instead of 13. And so I think that, and it just made that any information that we were sharing with that team was much more actionable, because I had taken the time to make sure that the way we were categorizing that mapped like how they were building the product. And I think that is sort of like my number one for voice to the customer, is that make sure you're talking the same language, so you're not requiring somebody else to translate why this is important.
Absolutely. That's I have way too many war stories on this one with every department. And what Stacy's talking about is 100% accurate. Is when in my experience, when you're working with sales, when you're working with marketing, when you're working with product, is really understanding what their priorities are, and kind of bringing that customer that feedback in a bucket that is pertaining to marketing. What do they care about? What are those stories? It's so all too often we always fall back on kind of firefighting, and it's always trying to pull ourselves back from that and really think about, we have a sales team that's really pushing new business, or we have a sales team that's really pushing upsell. Like, what are they compensated on? What are their goals? And how does the feedback that I have, how can I make sure they understand the impact that's there? And that's something that's super important, especially even on the product side, is really understanding, like, is this a one-off thing? What is the impact this actually has? Like, does this impact our whole enterprise customer base? Could this be 40 million in ARR versus $4 in ARR? That's something that's super important when we're communicating with these cross-functional teams. And one of the other things I was going to highlight too, and this is more external, so I'm kind of cheating when I say this on this question, is always having that closed loop. So our customers are always providing us this feedback. It's really important to think about, how do we close that loop with them so they're not just left hanging. I've done this in the past, where you collect a lot of feedback, you ask your customers all of these questions, but you never come back and say, here's our roadmap, here's what we're doing to solve this. Or, hey, this actually isn't a priority for us, is also very important. It's something I've learned over time, is the yes is great, but the no is even better, because they can get an understanding of where you stand as a company too. I'm curious on the B2C side, how this plays.
I think more than on the startup side, I can definitely think of a lot of experiences when I was working as a technical sales engineer, because I was on the sales side, and I'm a very true believer that the guy who's handling the account, who's facing whoever the customer is, knows really what the customer is facing, right? But then it comes down to, how do you make those other 1,000 people inside the organization come on the same page, because they are not seeing what you are seeing. So this is what I used to do, and I feel like was somehow effective. So literally the title would be like, happy customer email, customer very angry, like like things that would just pick up, and rather than saying, hey, I heard from my customer, this was a call, I used to always request my customer to send me an email. So especially if they're not happy, if they want something done. So rather than telling me on the phone call, I so appreciate it, but just send me one liner, what you're asking. I would take that, forward the email, or take a snapshot. So it's very easy then internally for a lot of people who are not seeing or understanding what is going on, the severity of the situation, because rather than like a horse's mouth situation, now they're literally seeing, oh, this is what customer wants. So I feel like that is one thing that I did in the past life, which was making sure that it is coming exactly from the source so that everyone can see this is what the source is saying. This is not my interpretation. This is what customer is saying. Customer is saying that we did something bad. I think we did great. So that was one thing. And I think second thing is, I think you brought up greatly, I think the follow-up. I think even especially when big issues happen, and as you said, when they are like multi-million-dollar deals, it's never going to get done in 1 or 2 days. But it's also important to keep the customer intact, of letting them know, like, hey, I escalated, I spoke to so and so team, the counter team knows about it, but just to make sure like the customer is also aware that we're working on it. Yeah.
Perfect. No, I'm going to actually start with you on this question. So this might be one of our last questions before we go to Q&A. But how can startups use customer satisfaction to build a really strong brand, and how have you used it in the past?
So for me, like, it's very important being customer obsessive. So like literally obsessive. So to give you an idea, to go a step ahead, we ship, let's say, UPS, FedEx, DHL, USPS. One of our recent incidences happened where we thought the delivery would have happened. The customer reached out, hey, it's not here. So at that point, it could have been just saying like, hey, it shows it's somewhere stuck at so-and-so warehouse, distribution center, forget it. You'll get it when you get it. What we did was we shipped another package, no cost added to the customer from our end. Just go ahead, get it. In the meantime, we resolved it with USPS. What had happened was in the Nashua distribution center, nice 280 packages just got off the conveyor belt, so they never got scanned. So someone had to actually go and manually put it back on the conveyor belt. In my head, I thought it's an easy job to get it done in half a day. It took them 2 weeks to get it back on the conveyor belt. But because we did that, not only customer was happy, we received more orders from them. But because it was so nice, once they got the second package, they literally was, hey, I've got 2 packages now. I'm happy to resend one back to you, rather than just like, being afraid that, oh, they have got more products than they paid for. So yes, just being customer obsessive, making sure you're resolving their issues first. They are getting the packages first, no matter what this issues might happen with shipping, packaging. Has been very helpful for us for making sure they are like you with the retention rate, the order rate, and just making sure they're part of the community, what we're focusing on right now.
I love that brand loyalty. Stacey, I'm curious from your side, kind of all the different ways you've seen customer satisfaction build brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a product-led company, sort of, like Loom, for example, we incorporate customer feedback and CSAT data when we are providing sort of that voice to the customer. And the sort of top, like, sort of painful bugs, most sort of requested sort of product feedback gets incorporated into the quarterly planning that product and engineering goes through each quarter. And I think that is a real driver for why we have a strong brand, right? Because users, share that feedback across support tickets. We have a product feedback suggestion board that users can submit suggestions to, and then they actually get to see that in the improvements and the features that get released, right? And then I think that kind of has a flywheel effect, because then when we do release something, for example, we had a summer launch, and the blog post that we had a plethora of really, really, really great, strong customer quotes. And I mean, that sort of continues the cycle. So I think that if you focus on sort of what your customers are saying, what their customers are looking for, what keeps them satisfied, and maybe more importantly, what doesn't, and you get that to the product team, things are released that sort of directly address those things. You get further great feedback that, yeah, this is like a much more effective product. I can't live without this product. And then that cycle keeps happening. So I think it's key to a strong brand.
I love it. And I'll kind of cap this off with, I said earlier, I've discounted NPS and kind of sentiment programs in the past. And what kind of I've realized over time is when you build a stronger, kind of well-defined program and you really have that feedback loop with your customer, it creates a very strong brand loyalty brand that folks want to come back to, even when you do have those issues. And that's something, if you can have that continuous feedback loop, even if it's really small and it's just saying that you're aware and you've been heard, that's something that people are going to remember. Because at the end of the day, like brands are about building relationships. And when your customers have a relationship with your brand, they're going to advocate for you when you're not there. And that's something that where customer satisfaction and measuring all of that really kind of starts closing that loop. So I'm going to pass it over to Rachel, and we're going to take some questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we'll do this Q&A is, like I said, we have both our in-person audience and our virtual audience. We'll just kind of toggle back and forth. So I'd encourage anyone that is tuning in virtually, feel free to pop questions into that Q&A tab. And if anyone in person would prefer that to be the vehicle for their question instead of speaking on the mic, totally fine as well. Feel free to pop it in there. For those of us in person, I will be running the mic around the room to each one of you with questions, just so that way the virtual attendees are also able to hear the audio. So let's start it off in person. Does anyone have any questions?
So my name's John Taylor. I'm a CFO. One of the things CFOs need to do in startups is make money for you. So here's my question. For those of you in the B2B space, and I'd be interested in the technical sales part especially, have you ever worked with your sales teams on charging for CX implementations? I don't know. That's the question.
I can kick that one off. One, I love that question because I personally love charging for implementations, because I also love putting that as a line item to make sure like we're offsetting our costs. So it's something that it's not easy to do in the early stages, because it's hard to ask for more money when you are just a straight like SaaS fee, for example. So it's something I've seen. How do you layer that in and make sure it is adding value, and your kind of delivery motion actually is worth its weight in gold, so to speak? So it's something I typically wouldn't start with. If you're like a seed stage company, I would make sure you're planning for it. But as you're starting to grow, you can start getting an a la carte menu. So for example, like what I've always kind of started with, what is a whiter glove, so to speak, onboarding motion? How can you offer that up that's better than what your base offering that doesn't have anything to it? But there's many different ways to tackle that. And what I like to do is kind of not necessarily tackle it from a pro services motion, but more tackle it from, here's what we're going to define and here's what you can expect, customer, because it's very easy to train a sales team on that. That right there is generally what's most important, is making sure the sales team can articulate that value. But I'm interested in both of yours.
Oh, Stacey, you want to go next, and then I can take the B2C.
I've actually had the pleasure of working for products that don't really require that. So I will pass it back to you.
Okay, all right. So back in my experience, so I'll save the whole engineering gingo. So in my back role, let's say for the building this phone, I had to sell this IC, correct? Now, there is a base level support that our whole product teams, everybody on earth at TI would provide to make sure that thing goes inside it. But then somebody will come two ways. There are always two categories. One is startups who don't have the support, or B is the big MNC companies who think they have the volume so they can demand and bully you, where they would ask more than what is the substantial thing. So I have seen this, and this is how we implement it. So if it was beyond a crazy threshold, it was always tied to the dollar amount, honestly. So it was beyond that crazy threshold that we have to win. If we are working for Google or an Apple and we have to win that, we will do anything what it takes to win that particular socket. Because once you're in, especially even industrial customers like Siemens or Honeywell, once you go in, you're in there for 25 years. So yes, I would take 2 years of my pain to make sure I am in. At the same time, it can be possible. They can be like, oh, you become my extended engineering team, then I don't want to hire. You do everything. So what I had seen was, we don't want to spoil relationship with you. So these are my third party guys that will help you out. That's between now you and them. I can help you connect you guys for free because they are our support community. We are out. We are not spoiling our relationship. I'm not dealing like telling Honeywell, I don't want to support you. Hey, I really want to support you. This is just beyond what we can do. We want to focus on building new products, ICs. I cannot build thermostats. That's not what TI does. But this company is actually very prone on learning our products. They know in and out. They have been with us right from the inception of this product. You can work with them. And that's how I think TI had, like I would say, concentrated this third party for different kind of such ICs and product groups. So whenever such requests would come, we would have a worldwide group that we can just like tell them to tag along with, still retaining a relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No
Thanks.
worries.
Wonderful. Another question that we had submitted virtually was, what are some tools that you would recommend to capture voice of customer and or feedback? And especially, I think we have an interesting mix of folks always in attendance at Startup Boston. So some folks are very early in their startup journey. Some folks might be in that growth stage and have a little bit more from a capital standpoint to play with. So curious if we'd be able to speak to probably both stages there.
Stacey, you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, I think we're in a very interesting time right now. So there are multiple companies that use AI to gather this feedback. So, and a lot of them are early on. So you might actually be able to not spend a lot of money to get one of these products, especially if you're one of sort of an early adopter. So what that allows you to do is basically get some of that feedback as the tickets are coming in without having to wait for someone to answer that ticket. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. So that is something that I would encourage folks to explore. Like we currently use a product for that, but we're also currently exploring other options because the space sort of has exploded as of late. And I think you can catch some of that feedback, especially if you're, iterating a bunch on your product pretty rapidly. You can get that feedback almost in real time. Granted, it takes a human to sort of make sure that fidget around with it and make sure it's working, but I think there's a lot of value there. And then I think whatever kind of, support platform you're using or whatever platform you're using to get that information, being able to pipe that in to your to Tableau or Mode or whatever tool you're using so that you can tie that customer feedback with any customer information you have. Okay, so enterprise customers, this is sort of feedback that is specific to enterprise customers, or this is feedback that sort of is universal, no matter what plan or spend or where they are in their customer life cycle. This is consistent feedback across the board, or we're going after a sales use case. So we want to know what feedback is coming from sales folks. And so I think being able to pair that information with the customer data you have, there's really low lift ways you can do this too, right? Like maybe if you start, you look up their user ID and you see what their, what sort of they selected when they signed up, what sort of their profile or persona is. So there's some low tech ways you can do this, but I think if you have the opportunity to pair your customer feedback with customer data, that is one of the best ways I think to make that voice of the customer information really actionable.
One of the quick things I'll just touch on with tooling, it's really important, especially with fast scaling companies. And I've run into this, is making sure before you buy a tool, you're really working cross, especially with voice of customer and feedback. You're really understanding what you're trying to accomplish and what those roles and responsibilities are. So it's really important you're kind of sitting down and putting that almost in a RACI to make sure you're buying the right tech. It's all too often, I've seen things get siloed in product tools, like a product board or an AHA or user voice. And same thing on the CS side, it could get stuck in Salesforce, could get stuck in Gainsight and all the CS tooling there. So it's really important to make sure you understand from a marketing, a product, a CS, and even sales lens that how does all this data feed each other, so you aren't buying siloed solutions, and that it is more democratized to Stacey's point in getting into BI.
I think in terms of tools, there are two that comes to my mind where I'm thinking about that's helpful for us an e-commerce side. So one is called Hotjar. So Hotjar, I personally love what it does. It literally captures customers' journey on your website. Um, Free version, 35 sessions per day free. So and then there's a paid version as well. But what it does, it literally captures what devices someone is using, what area they're coming from, which are the hot areas you're clicking. So on a website analysis, I kind of get to know this is the most clicked item, this is the most visited page, or literally like why that customer did spend 15 minutes on my website and did make a sale. So what happened there? And I think I feel Hotjar was able to give me that analysis of figuring out, oh, this is where we are lacking and giving me website improvements. And in terms of customer support, initially when I started, it was pretty manageable, just doing, Facebook inbox, Instagram inbox, Shopify inbox, everything, then your Square and Clover as well. But now that we have grown, there are many platforms. Gorgias, like I think it's Gorgis. I may be pronouncing it wrong. I'm sorry, but it's one company where they integrate with all the different inboxes for e-commerce, Facebook, Instagram, Shopify, name it, any kind of POS. So wherever the customer is reaching out to you, it will come up in the same platform. So probably these are the two tools that come to my mind, and I use it pretty frequently.
Awesome. Do we have an in-person question?
Hey, thanks. So thinking about the B2B world, customer feedback, you have like your customer or your client who's paying for the service and sometimes a beneficiary user who is not that business. How do you think about that kind of like multi-stakeholder approach to collecting customer feedback and like user feedback overall?
Yeah, I'll tackle this one because it's a thing that, especially in I've worked in a lot of platform companies. So you have your, and I'm going to use very generic terms here, but you have your buyer, you have your champion, you have your end users, and then you have different flavors underneath that and different personas. Really defining what those are from a marketing, sales, and product lens is super important. So you can, one, speak that common language internally, but also define it externally. So for us, like we have truck drivers that are end users that are on a mobile app. We really care about their feedback, but it's going to be very, very different than what our admin's feedback is. And same thing from the CFOs that at the companies, like they want to know what's in our product because that's where you get the operational efficiency reporting, but they're not in our product, so to speak. So their feedback's going to be over here in left field. So really like how we operationalize that is in our product, we help folks self-identify. So truck driver, for example, if you're on the mobile app, typically that's going to be an end user. So that's how like when we're proactively paying them in our product, that's how we're collecting that. From our customer team and customer facing motions, like we educate our customers, like who are they speaking with? How can they make sure that hygiene's there on the contact table in Salesforce where we're putting all of that feedback. So we're like really like at the end of the day, it's really about defining those personas and making sure you internally and externally know what those are.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot.
Yeah.
And the feedback's different.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Another question we had online was sort of to the question of kind of selecting what metrics you're tracking. Certainly over the life cycle of your company, you might have legacy metrics that are just always pertinent to what you're doing. But certainly as your team scales, as your product or offering kind of evolves over time, those key metrics might change relative to kind of what you're working on. So curious if you'd be able to speak to kind of that and figuring out maybe at the early stage, if you're picking a few, what those might be, and then how to kind of maybe communicate internally to the team, but also make those decisions of this might not be as representative of where we are now as it once was.
You want to go first?
I'll let either you or Stacy go first.
Sounds good. I think few KPIs that we track is how frequently our emails are open, specifically when the campaign is revolving around how do we make our product and brand better. We are not shy of listening to how we can improve. So I feel like we track those kind of things. And after that, we always like send a follow-up with some kind of offer. So we are tracking that one as well of how many times, like how the open rate were, Did they end up clicking the offer? If they end up buying, yes, we'll see the order, but how does that process look like? Right from we send the first email, how many of them opened it, what did they end up clicking, and eventually if there was any feedback collected from them or not.
I can speak a little bit to kind of like maturing. Like I'm going to focus more on like a customer success organization, because you may at an early stage company start a CSM organization or a CS organization to be really focused on just the two bookends of the customer journey. So one being renewals, and renewals and upsell, and the other being onboarding. As you grow, though, you may invest in it differently. So you may specialize in that department. And what's really important is making sure you understand, once you start specializing, how do those retention, those upsell, more commercial metrics change into more like value-based metrics, which is in the middle. So that's something where you're defining like, how are we working with our red customers, our orange customers? How are we moving those from red to green? Same thing with onboarding. Like your first goal may just be like, we just want to get these people onboarded as fast as possible. You may learn over time, like what is that time to first value for a company, and you may start changing, like, okay, we're going to change the way we actually onboard. We're going to change some of those baseline metrics to rally around that. We're actually going to introduce self-guided onboarding. It's going to help lift that as well. So there's a lot of metrics that change over time, and you have to do a lot of internal communication about roles changing too.
Wonderful. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. I know that there's still some unanswered questions. So what I would say is we do have, LinkedIn profiles and everything like that for our speakers available on the website. And now you're able to put names and faces with some incredible CS leaders in our community. So definitely feel free to lean on that. And in closing, I just want to say once again,